Hello everyone, this is Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I'm here on a exciting Tag Tuesday with the Leap Year book tag. I saw this one about 2.5 weeks ago, and I thought that's a fantastic one to do in a February where there is a leap year this year. So thought I'd give it a shot. The original one is from Hillary at Melted Books and Amy Myers. I'll leave those links below. But the Leap Year book tag, here we go. First one, in leap year, there is an extra day. So what is one book that brought something extra, something special? And I thought of a few, but I decided one that I always enjoy. I thought of different like Norton Critical Editions or Viking Critical Library ones that have lots of notes, but I thought just a text on its own that brought something exciting was The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I absolutely love this book. My wife absolutely loves that book. I'm excited to read it one day with my daughters. It's a book I've lent to students, to family members. We have 2 copies of it, so we can have our own, but like sort of lend one out. And I adore that book. Second question, taking a big leap. What is a book that you are or were afraid to read? And I had a couple of different takes on this, and I couldn't decide which way to go. So I grabbed 2 books. The first is the Satyricon of Petronius. So I'll probably do like a full video one day where I talk about the evening I was in college as a freshman during winter finals and pulled a book off the shelf in the dorm library called Prometheans, Ancient and Modern, and I ended up just reading the entire thing in one sitting. Not even one night, but in one sitting. I think I may have gone up to go to the bathroom once. But otherwise, I was just totally engrossed. And I was 18 years old, and it basically listed all these different texts and these different writers, and I had never heard of most of them. And the writer made them sound like texts that and writers I needed to pay attention to. And I basically sat down and made a list, and then emailed it off, saying like, "Hey, here's some books I want for Christmas." This was one of the only ones that anyone had found, and so I was really interested to read it, but also sort of there was a bit of trepidation around, hey, is this book actually going to be good? Like, I spent all night reading this ancient book from the 30s that was legitimately falling apart in my hands. Were the books that it listed also going to be interesting? Were they going to pique my appetite for greater things? And I think Petronius did. This isn't one of my favorite books, but it's a book that I read at a time where I was starting to really open into the much wider world of writing and human thought. And this was a book that helped me get into that. Another one that I was kind of nervous about reading is The Dying Earth by Jack Vance. Very slim little book. And that was really just because I love science fiction and I knew how influential Jack Vance was. I had seen like anthologies of stories inspired by his Dying Earth called like Songs of the Dying Earth, and I knew how influential he was on things like Dungeons and Dragons, which I had a lot of friends who played. And so I was kind of nervous about reading it because it was one of those things of, look, is this actually going to be super enjoyable, and or am I going to be reading it through the lens and the fog of influence and not really able to see what made it such a gem of writing? And I really enjoyed it. So those are 2 and kind of different takes on that. Third question. Leap year happens every 4 years. What's the 4th book I read in 2020? It is a heavy, dense, well thought out book. Dr. Seuss's Book of Animals. This was read on January 1st with my 2 daughters. And it's probably not one of my favorite Dr. Seuss's, but it's got lots of great language. It's got the hysterical pictures, which I find, sort of as my daughters learn to recite the book, then we'll talk about the different weird pictures and say, like, what color is that? What does that look like? What do you think it's doing? And so Dr. Seuss books always give you a great opportunity to do that. The 4th question, this is kind of funky. There are 366 days in leap year. So on your 3rd shelf, take the 6th book and then the 6th book. So I grabbed the first shelf over here, and I have stacks. You can kind of see some of my shelves are stacked by publisher. That stack down is mostly vintage publication from Knopf Publishing, not like old vintage, but the vintage imprint. And so within that, I had Herman Brock's The Sleepwalkers, which I read the first part of the trilogy as, I want to say, the first book. I think I finished reading it the night of New Year's Day. And great European modernist work. And then grabbed the sixth book after that. Well, I have books stacked like on top of that. You can kind of see in some places that I do that here. So that book was Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, which is a masterpiece, and I love and I reread, and is one of my favorite books. So I thought that just happened to be wonderful. Leaping ahead, 4 books to read by the next leap year. I'll go out on a limb and say I'd like to read The Shadow of the Wind with one or both of my daughters. I'd also like to read Watership Down with one or both of them. Those are 2 books that I think, especially Watership Down, I loved as a child, and my older daughter will be 7 in 4 years. So being able to sit and read that with her would be a real joy. So that's 2, maybe, let's see. I'll probably have finished my rereads of Jane Austen by that point, and I've got what I call, I'm going to figure out how to do it one day, but I've got what I call Hamilton, the text. And so I've got a bunch of the Library of America texts in here. So that's Hamilton, that's Madison. I want to say that's Jefferson and Washington. So I've got a lot of primary sources from the Library of America. Maybe I'd figure out sort of like a Hamilton mix read, like a mixtape except with readings, and figure out how to put those together. That'll be the 4th one. I can do that in 4 years. 6th question, Leapfrog, a book on your TBR that has green on it. And it's one I just picked up recently. It is Inhuman Land by Joseph Japski. He's a famous Polish painter, one of the best Polish painters of the 20th century. This is actually one of his paintings. But he had an interesting piece where he was a POW in the Soviet Union during the early part of World War II. And then when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union and attacked them, the Soviet Union tried to re-equip some of the Polish POWs they had. And Japski was sort of like a middle-aged man. Well, he was an adult by that point, and not a young adult by that point. And he was tasked with trying to gather together accounts of what had been going on. They had no idea about the massive massacre of Polish leaders and military leaders that had already happened and the Soviet Union never admitted. And so Inhuman Land is this idea of, I think the subtitle is Searching for the Truth in Soviet Russia, 1941 to 1942. And I had read a little bit about this, and when I saw it in a used bookstore, and there was like even I had a coupon and things like that, I just grabbed it up for like $4, and I'm interested to read it. It's hard to say you're ever excited to read about things that involve like that level of history and just terrible things happening, but I'm definitely interested in reading it. I think it's one of those books that will sharpen my mind and sharpen my interactions with others in a positive way. So that is my, last question, bad luck. Bookish things to steer clear of. Well, anybody who saw, which one was the Dark Academia book tag, knows I really try never to highlight in my books. I have journals or notebooks where I transcribe passages that I think are important. And someone asked, how do you, I think it was Seeking Stories, asked, how do you remember to do that? And I said, well, I just have like a pad nearby, and I just note the page numbers as I'm reading. So I'm not really stopping to transcribe. I just note page numbers as I'm reading. And then when I finish reading, I go back and look at the pages. And if I can't tell what was really important in there to transcribe, I don't worry about it. If I can, then I sit down and might spend 2 minutes or 15, 20 minutes copying out some of what I've read and making my own sort of thoughts or notes or reflections around that. And I think that, the act of physically writing it out helps me remember it a little better than if I highlight it. So I don't highlight in my books. So that's me. I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and this was the Leap Year book tag. So thank you. Thanks for watching, and there's still time. Fit it in. I mean, there's still time in February, but there's still time for the whole year. So thank you, everyone. Have fun.